Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. And if you told me just a few years ago that on the weekend after a Marvel movie and a Lord of the Rings movie came out, that we'd be talking about a low box office performance for both of those films, I would have been surprised. But, that's why you play the game. You got to see what actually happens. And we had two franchise low debuts from two big name franchises, plus the holdovers from Wicked and Moana 2, which are dominating the holiday season so far. So let's jump right into the weekend top 10. Now, these are estimates, and I'm putting the show up on Monday because I'm on the road today to see Mufasa and Sonic 3. I'll have reviews of those movies tomorrow and Wednesday, but I really don't think a whole lot's going to change. Moana 2, in its third weekend of release, stays at the number one spot with $26.6 million. Its domestic total is approaching $350 million. But look at that gap between Moana 2 and Wicked, which is in its fourth weekend. Only about $4 million between those two movies. Wicked dropped 38%. Its domestic total now almost $360 million. And we're going to look at the competition or race or whatever you might want to call it. I don't think it's a competition, but the idea that Moana 2 is definitely going to be the higher domestic grosser may be in question. In third place is Kraven the Hunter, which opens with an estimated $11 million. I think Sony is giving us a high estimate. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in the $10 million range when the actuals come in tomorrow, and we'll update that next week if we need to. But yeah, that's not a great number. Kraven is the only other film in the Spider-Verse, extended or otherwise, that did not open number one, aside from Madam Web. Madam Web opened at number 2 earlier this year, although it also opened on Wednesday instead of Friday. Had it opened on Friday, maybe it would have opened number 1. But this is definitely the only movie in the Spider-Verse that opened at number 3. It's all number 1s, one number 2, and now number 3 for Kraven the Hunter. Although, if you saw my review of the film, you know that I think that movie is number 2 on a different level. In fourth place is Gladiator 2, which dropped 38% for $7.8 million. It's getting close to $150 million domestically. In fifth place is The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. If there's a movie that had a worse weekend than Kraven the Hunter, it'd be this one. Although Kraven the Hunter cost over $100 million and War of the Rohirrim had about a $30 million reported budget. But still, less than $5 million for a theatrical Lord of the Rings movie. Yes, the budget was low. Yes, the marketing campaign wasn't huge. It was in 2,600 theaters. It wasn't as big of a wide release as we often see, 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 theaters for the biggest films. But that just goes to show you that a brand name really only goes so far. You have to make a movie that people are interested in, that they want to go see. There were reports that they made this film just so that they could keep the rights at New Line to make more Lord of the Rings movies. So we will see how the Search for Gollum and all of the other movies they're working on do in the future. But I mean, this is a really bad result for both of these films. Of course, the analysis channels around the internet are giving you all kinds of reasons why these movies failed, specifically with War of the Rohirrim. I see the word girl boss thrown around a lot in my comments, and then when I track the source of that to various channels around the internet, I think that that's kind of an interesting take, considering that when you look at the movies at number 1 and number 2 that have been dominating the box office for a month, they share many of the qualities that I've heard that audiences don't want by not going to see Lord of the Rings. I think that it was much more about Warner Brothers and New Line just not really making a movie in general that people want to go see. If the main character had been Helm Hammerhand, I don't see this movie opening to $30 million. I think that they just made something that people didn't really care about. But, it takes all kinds here on the internet, and for a lot of folks, it's good news because this keeps the lights on till Snow White, and that'll be the next thing. And, listen, it's working for them. They're very successful, way more successful than me here. I'm just a guy in his bedroom spouting numbers. But anyway, number 5 is Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. In sixth place is Red One. It dropped 37%, which is pretty impressive considering that it is now available to stream on Amazon Prime Video. So plenty of people still choosing to go see it in theaters. It may crack that $100 million barrier, especially because it is still in theaters as we get close to Christmas, though we'll see how many it loses when these two big releases hit this upcoming weekend. In seventh place is the 10th anniversary re-release of Interstellar. It actually added theaters and dropped just 28% from last weekend. It brought in $3.3 million for an $11.7 million total. In fourth is Pushpa the Rule Part 2, which dropped 67% in week 2. That sounds steep, but we often see films from India dropping 70, 80% or more in their second weekends. It brought in $101.6 million and $13 million so far domestically. That makes it the second highest grossing Indian film this year domestically, behind Kalki 2898 AD, and we'll talk more about Pushpa 2 when we look at the worldwide box office. And ninth place is the best Christmas pageant ever. It's hanging around 6 weeks in the top 10. It dropped just 10%, brought in $1.35 million. And in 10th place is Luca Guadagnino's Queer, which expanded not into wide release, but added a few hundred theaters, a 95% increase in business to $790,000. Its total so far is $1.9 million. So let's talk about some of the movies that are in the top 10, and we will start with Kraven the Hunter, which posted up one of the worst opening weekends ever for a Marvel movie, MCU or otherwise. The worst opening belongs to Punisher Warzone back in 2008, which opened to $4.2 million. Then we have Howard the Duck in 1986. These are unadjusted for inflation. It opened to just over $5 million. In the third spot, we have The New Mutants, which finally opened at the very, not even the tail end of the COVID pandemic, but really when they just started reopening theaters back in August of 2020, it opened to just over $7 million. And there's Kraven the Hunter right there at $11 million, just ahead of Elektra back in 2005. If you did adjust for inflation, it would be these same 5 movies. I think Kraven would move up a spot, Howard the Duck would move back a couple spots, but these are the 5 lowest opening Marvel movies of all time. I would wager to say that Kraven probably had the biggest budget out of all of those 5. But when you look at it, I mean, you know, if you exclude The New Mutants because of the complications with the pandemic, we're talking about mid-aughts and 80s since we've seen a Marvel movie open this low. And I think it's the same thing as War of the Rohirrim when I talk about why that movie didn't do well. You just have to make a movie that people want to see. And I don't think that audiences really cared about or wanted to see a movie about Kraven the Hunter. I'm sure that the bad reviews probably kept some people away, but I think a larger part of it is just that the audience interest wasn't there. And if there's one thing that has become very clear over the last few years, and that studios are still struggling to learn because these movies are in production for years, is that a brand name is not enough anymore. You can't just throw Marvel or Lord of the Rings on something and expect people to show up. People are changing their viewing habits. They're being much more discriminating about when they go to the theater, how much money they spend on movies, and you need something more than just a vague attachment to another movie that somebody liked at a certain point in the past. I mentioned the audience reaction. Kraven the Hunter actually had one of the lowest cinema scores of any comic book movie ever made. We made this chart back when Joker Folie à Deux came out earlier this year. That's why it's all the way over there by itself with a D cinema score, the worst ever received by a comic book film. Kraven the Hunter got a C cinema score. It shares that real estate with Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, Hellboy 2019, and 5 other films. The only comic book movies to get a worse cinema score than a C are Fantastic or 2015's Fantastic Four, The Spirit, Whiteout, and Joker Folie à Deux. So not a whole lot of distinguished company. I mean, if you look up there, Madam Web and Morbius both got a C+, along with Batman and Robin and some other movies. So even on the sliding scale of audience reaction to these extended Spider-Verse movies, Kraven still comes in at the bottom of the barrel. Looking at the franchise tracker for the Spider-Verse, and I had to redesign this a little bit because we now have 16 films, Kraven the Hunter has the lowest opening weekend of any Spider-Verse film, $11 million. That's more than $4 million below Madam Web. And remember, that is a movie that opened on Wednesday, so it would be even lower had Madam Web opened on a Friday. When you adjust for inflation, of course, it's still in the bottom spot, about $30 million behind Morbius, $40 million behind Venom: The Last Dance, which opened just a few weeks ago. So again, you can't just say it's only because people are tired of Marvel or comic book movies, because a movie in the same universe opened to a much higher figure not that long ago. There are some things specifically with Kraven that the audience just didn't care about. When we look at where Kraven might end up in the Spider-Verse domestically, I mean, it would have to get to $43.8 million in order to stay out of the bottom spot. So it basically have to do 4 times its opening weekend. I don't think there's a chance that's going to happen because we have a huge movie-going weekend coming up, and people just didn't really like this movie. It's an R-rated film. You're not going to get that family crowd over the Christmas break. So I think that this is going to be easily the lowest grossing film in the Spider-Verse. Looking at it adjusted for inflation, again, this really just makes things look worse. It'll be one of only 3 movies that did not make it to the $100+ million mark in the Spider-Verse. And we will also look at the Spider-Verse worldwide when we get to those numbers in just a few minutes. I also wanted to take a look at the Middle-earth films, specifically Peter Jackson's Middle-earth, and War of the Rohirrim looks even worse when you compare it to the other films in the franchise than Kraven the Hunter does, because so many of the Middle-earth films opened so big. These are the opening weekends for the Middle-earth films. Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim is now the 7th in that specific franchise, and it comes in over $40 million behind Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. That's unadjusted for inflation, keeping in mind that Fellowship of the Ring opened 23 years ago and also opened on a Wednesday. So, every qualifier you could throw at it, it just makes War of the Rohirrim look worse. And actually, a lot of the Middle-earth films, the majority of them, opened on Wednesday. Fellowship of the Ring opened on Wednesday. Five Armies opened on Wednesday. The Two Towers and Return of the King all opened on Wednesday, which makes this a little tougher, but we're not really comparing apples to apples here, because War of the Rohirrim didn't even get close to any of these. When you look at it adjusted for inflation, Return of the King has the highest opening in franchise history at $124.5 million, followed by The Hobbit and Unexpected Journey at $116.2 million, then The Two Towers at $108.7, Desolation of Smaug, The Fellowship of the Ring, and The Battle of the Five Armies are at 4, 5, and 6, and then The War of the Rohirrim is at number 7. And what I think is interesting, this is a pattern that I think follows every single domestic tracker for the Middle-earth franchise, is that when you look at it for Lord of the Rings, it goes in reverse order. So the highest grossing is Return of the King, then The Two Towers, then Fellowship of the Ring. So it's something that built over time and culminated in the highest grossing film of the franchise. When you look at The Hobbit, it's the opposite. The highest grossing is An Unexpected Journey, then Desolation of Smaug, then Battle of the Five Armies. So it declined over time. And now you have War of the Rohirrim, which comes in way behind those other ones. But when you look at that, it becomes fairly obvious that the Middle-earth franchise, as of right now, peaked with Return of the King, had a bit of carryover to An Unexpected Journey, then went downhill as the Hobbit franchise went on. And so this thinking from Warner Brothers that maybe people would be coasting on the high of those other movies, I don't think they took into account that audience enthusiasm was already dropping, 10 years ago when Five Armies came out, and it was dropping film by film. So those are the kind of patterns that I think are interesting when we're doing this sort of box office analysis. This is the franchise tracker as far as final domestic box office, and it's one where you'll see those patterns. At number 1 is Return of the King, followed by The Two Towers and Fellowship of the Ring. Then we have The Hobbit and Unexpected Journey, The Desolation of Smaug, and The Battle of the Five Armies. The lowest grossing domestic film in the Middle-earth franchise is Battle of the Five Armies at $255.1 million. War of the Rohirrim right now is at $4.6 million. I think it's going to be lucky to get to $20 million, so it could be in last place domestically by $225 million. That could be the gap between 6 and 7. That may be a record as far as the lowest to the next lowest in franchise history. And again, it should be a wake-up call to Warner Brothers and New Line as far as their plans for the Lord of the Rings franchise. This is the domestic box office inflation adjusted. Return of the King, when you adjust for inflation, had a $650 million gross. Two Towers wasn't that far behind at $605 million. Then we had Fellowship of the Ring at $567.9. The Hobbit and Unexpected Journey was the top grossing Hobbit film. It came in at $416.3 million adjusted for inflation. Desolation of Smaug and the Battle of the Five Armies were pretty close to each other, $349.7, $339.2, and then we have War of the Rohirrim at $4.6 million. So it's hard to, I don't want to harp on this, but it's hard to believe it's so far below these other films. So those are the stories on Kraven and War of the Rohirrim. Let's look at some of the other movies in the top 10, and we'll start with number 1 and number 2 because they are both among the highest grossing movies ever released in November, and they were really on the move last weekend. Wicked is now the 5th highest grossing film ever released in November. It comes in behind Frozen, The Hunger Games: Catching Fire, Wakanda Forever, and Frozen 2. Moana 2 is now the 6th highest grossing film ever released in November. It jumps ahead of Mockingjay Part 1, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Thor Ragnarok, and Skyfall. And when we look at Broadway adaptation grosses adjusted for inflation, Wicked moves up to number 8 on that list, ahead of Cabaret and Oliver. It's about $100 million behind West Side Story. We'll see how much it's got left in the tank. I don't know if it's going to get quite that high, but still, as I mentioned last week, it's the newest movie on this chart by almost 50 years, so it just goes to show you how successful that movie is. What's interesting with these two movies, though, Wicked and Moana 2, they didn't open the same weekend, but they opened in such close proximity that they've sort of been paired together. And Moana 2 had such a big opening weekend that I assumed that that momentum alone would carry it to a higher domestic gross than Wicked. But now I'm not so sure, because let's look at these two movies through 19 days of release. Now, these days don't quite match up because Moana 2 opened during the week ahead of Thanksgiving. Wicked opened on a Friday, so the weekend days don't match up. It's going to be a long-term pattern thing. But what we see here, Wicked is in green, Moana 2 is in red. You see the first 2 days of Moana were pretty close to Wicked. Then Thanksgiving week really kicked in. And look at that gap that Moana 2 opened up on Wicked. I mean, that is a big gap, but then that gap closes as we hit that post-Thanksgiving week and as Wicked's second weekend kind of catches up with Moana. Then Moana 2 opens up another little gap as it started going into its second weekend, and now they've closed together a little bit. But the thing that's interesting is, look at how close they are on that chart. 19 days of release takes us to where Moana 2 is right now in its release schedule. It takes us back to last Tuesday as far as Wicked goes. We know from the daily numbers that Wicked was outgrossing Moana 2 during the week last week, so that'll really close the gap a lot more once those numbers get plugged in there. And then there was only a $4 million gap between those two movies this weekend. The big question coming up as we go into Christmas is, how much of a bite of the family market are Mufasa and Sonic the Hedgehog 3 going to take? And is that going to allow Wicked to open up a lead that it's not going to give away? They have sing-along screenings that start on December 25th. I'm still not sure who's going to end up at number one domestically between these two films. It's over as far as worldwide goes. It's going to be Moana 2. But domestically, this is going to be very interesting because Moana 2 is dropping off a little bit more quickly. It's got more direct competition coming up. And Wicked has a very, very loyal fan base with those special screenings coming up that may bring more of them in over the Christmas holidays. But this is something I'm going to keep tracking, because you look at the size of their opening weekends, you think, oh, well, Moana 2's got it running away. Not necessarily. Quickly, I also want to talk about Gladiator 2. We talked last week about how it is Denzel Washington's highest grossing film of all time domestically. It is now in Ridley Scott's top 5 domestically. His highest grossing film is The Martian at $228.4 million, followed by Gladiator at $187.6 million, Hannibal at $165 million, and now we have Gladiator 2 at number 4 at $145.9 million. American Gangster rounds out the top 5. When you adjust for inflation, Gladiator 2 isn't quite there yet, and I don't know if it's going to get there. Alien, basically due to the fact that it's been re-released a few times, barely edges out Gladiator to be Ridley Scott's highest grossing movie domestically, adjusted for inflation, at just under $350 million. Then we have Gladiator at $343.8. The Martian is in third at just over $300 million. Hannibal is about $10 million behind that. And American Gangster still rounding out the top 5. That's the interesting thing about Ridley Scott. He's made so many classic films, but they very rarely are big blockbusters, talking $200 million plus. They are often very artistically influential, but they don't necessarily run up massive numbers at the box office. Dropping out of the top 10 this weekend, we had 3 movies for King and Country, A Drummer Boy Christmas Live, Solo Leveling, Reawakening, and Y2K. Those are all movies that were very unlikely to stay in the top 10 past 1 week. And looking at the biggest theater count changes for the past weekend, Pushpa the Rule Part 2. This is impressive. It stayed in the top 10 despite losing almost half of its theaters. It lost 614 theaters. It's still in 631. Venom: The Last Dance lost 510 theaters. It's now in 344. Bonhoeffer, Pastor Spy Assassin lost 500 theaters. It's now in 445. Queer actually added 413 theaters, so it's now in a total of 460 as we go into the Christmas holiday. And then losing 368 theaters was a movie we didn't even talk about last week because it wasn't on the radar much at all. The Return, starring Ralph Fiennes as Odysseus in a take on Homer's The Odyssey. It lost 368 theaters. It's now in just 261. So if you didn't see it last weekend, you probably missed your chance. Looking at what I like to call our road to recovery, the blue line is the weekend average for 2015 to 2019. The red line is 2021 to 2023. The dotted black line is every weekend this year. And you can see that we are well below the average for both pre and post pandemic. Honestly, though, this has not been the case with every weekend so far this year. It's not for lack of trying on the studio's parts. They put out 2 big franchise movies. It's just that neither one of them connected with an audience, and that took us way below where we have been. Although I think we're going to see, I'm almost 100% sure we're going to see a huge spike this upcoming weekend with both Mufasa and Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and we'll see what that carryover is into the Christmas holiday. And my member poll question last week was about these December releases and which one you, the fans, thought would be the highest grossing film in December. I said last week that I think the Vegas odds would probably be on Mufasa the Lion King, and it did come out ahead in the fan poll, but it was a much closer margin, honestly, than I anticipated. 56% of you who replied, and there were over 100 responses, said that they believed that Mufasa the Lion King would be the highest grossing December release domestically, but 41% voted for Sonic the Hedgehog 3. That's a much closer competition than I anticipated. 2% are horror fans who believe that Nosferatu could pull out the win. Literally nobody voted for a complete unknown. I could have just left that off the poll completely because either no one voted for it or I think one person voted for it. If you add up these percentages, they don't add up to 100 because I don't get fractions of a percent. So either one of these movies is a little bit higher or a complete unknown maybe got 1 vote, but it's just not statistically significant enough to count on this poll. So yes, Mufasa the Lion King wins the poll, but still, I was impressed by that margin, and that may speak a little bit to the relative potential box office success of Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Maybe there's more fan enthusiasm and it's not such a done deal for Disney this upcoming weekend. For this week's member poll, I wanted to stay in the realm of December releases, but we're looking backward and not forward. Whether it's Mufasa or whether it's Sonic the Hedgehog 3, the top grossing film in December is going to be a sequel. And I actually started to wonder how many top grossing films in December domestically have been wholly original films. And when I say wholly, I mean not based in any way on a true story, or it's not a sequel, it's not a remake, anything like that. And it turns out that in the last 30 years, since 1994, there have only been 4 top grossing domestic December releases that were completely original. So I wanted to see which one of these 4 was your personal favorite. So these are the 4 movies in contention. Avatar from 2009 was the last one. And I can already hear your comments. It's Fern Gully. Listen, I get it. You think it's derivative, but it is not technically officially based on anything directly. So Avatar is one of them. Gran Torino was actually the highest grossing film in December of the year that it came out. Castaway back in the year 2000 was also an original film. That was the highest grossing movie released in December. And then we go back 30 years to Dumb and Dumber. Believe it or not, the highest grossing December release back in 1994. So between these 4 movies, Avatar, Gran Torino, Castaway, Dumb and Dumber, 4 very different films, which original top December grosser is your favorite? The poll is open now, and I will give you the results right here on the show next week. If you want to vote in the poll and you're not yet a member, depending on how you're watching it, there should be a button for you to push if you want to be a member here on the channel, or if you can't find the button, there is a link down in the description below. I'd love to have you as a member here on the channel to hear your voice on these member polls. You'll also get early access to some of my videos, custom emoji and badges for use in the chat. So yeah, this is, I think, an interesting question. I honestly don't know who's going to win, so I'm looking forward to next week to seeing who actually comes out on top in this competition. We've got a lot more to go over, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsors for this week's show. This video is brought to you by Chubbies. Christmas is just a week away, which means if you don't live somewhere cold, you may well be traveling somewhere that is. Well, it's not too late to upgrade your winter wardrobe because Chubbies has certified winterproof jackets, vests, sweatshirts, quarter zips, full zips, flannels, basically anything you need to stay warm. Not only are Chubbies clothes warm and comfortable, they're stylish too. I'm a particular fan of their Everywhere pants, which are perfect for just about anything I need to do, from Christmas shopping to walking around in the cold and enjoying the sights and sounds of the season. I have a flannel shirt from Chubbies that's been a great addition to my wardrobe. It has the style that, well, you all know that I love, but with the comfort of fleece and the warmth of a cozy sweater. It's great for layering, and if you watch the show, you know that I love to layer. Plus, if you're a sports fan, Chubbies has launched an NFL collection with stuff you can wear all year round. 12 teams are available now, and every team is coming in 2025. Check out the Chubbies website for their best deals of the year, and for a limited time, our friends over at Chubbies are giving our listeners 20% off with the promo code DAN20 at chubbyshorts.com. That's 20% off your order with the promo code DAN20. Support the show and tell them that I sent you. This holiday season, find the perfect gift for you and your loved ones at Chubbies. This video is brought to you by Miracle Made. All right, it's crunch time. No more procrastinating or trying to decide what to buy. Those days until Christmas are ticking away. So give your friends and family the gift of warmth and comfort with Miracle Made sheets. Miracle Made sheets use silver-infused fabrics inspired by NASA to make sure that you stay at the perfect temperature all night long. And like the Jelly of the Month Club, it's the gift that keeps on giving the whole year. I started using Miracle Made sheets earlier this year, and I haven't looked back. I sleep great, and I can't remember the last time I woke up in the middle of the night, either hot or cold. Plus, these sheets prevent up to 99.7% of bacterial growth, which means they last 3 times longer than regular sheets. I guarantee you that whoever you buy these sheets for will still be thanking you this summer, or you know what? Why not buy yourself a present? It's Christmas. Go to trymiracle.com/Dan to try Miracle Made sheets today, and whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%, and if you use our promo code Dan at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product that it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you're not 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/Dan and use the code Dan to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/Dan to treat yourself. Thanks to Miracle Made for sponsoring this video. Let's move away from the domestic box office and see what movies were on top around the world. So this is all markets outside of the US and Canada. Moana 2 is still number 1. It brought in another $57.2 million internationally. Push Pull the Rule Part 2 comes in second place. It brought in another $27.5 million. Wicked is in third at $21.4 million. Again, its international appeal lags far behind its domestic appeal. Kraven the Hunter opens to just $15 million in international markets, so not really a hit movie anywhere else either. And then Gladiator 2 is at number 5 at $9.7 million. When you take those international numbers, you combine them with our domestic numbers, we get our top 5 films worldwide. Moana 2 is at number 1. It dropped 45.9%, brought in another $83.8 million. Its worldwide gross is now over $700 million. Wicked had a pretty light drop, again, largely because it had a light drop here domestically. It brought in $43.9 million. It's at over $500 million worldwide, $524.9 million. Push Pull the Rule Part 2 dropped 49.3%, brought in $29.2 million worldwide. Its worldwide gross is now at $166.7 million. That is a massive number for a film from India. Kraven the Hunter opens to $26 million worldwide. We'll see if it can even get to 50. I don't know if we can get to 50 worldwide. Gladiator 2 drops 40.8%, brings in another $17.5 million. Its worldwide gross is quickly approaching $400 million. And when we look at the Spider-Verse as far as worldwide box office totals, Kraven the Hunter's got to get to $100 million to not be the lowest grossing Spider-Verse film of all time. Again, that would be a 4x multiple on its opening weekend. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be easily the lowest grossing movie in the Spider-Verse. Morbius is there at $162.7 million. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse at number 13. Venom: The Last Dance still trying to crawl towards $500 million to see if it can at least match Venom: Let There Be Carnage. We'll see what happens there. Looking at the franchise tracker for Middle-earth, this is even more depressing than the one that we looked at earlier. War of the Rohirrim opened to $10.3 million worldwide, which means it's only about $884 million behind Fellowship of the Ring, which was previously the lowest grossing worldwide film. Yeah, this gap is going to be massive. I don't know. I don't know how much more I can say about it, except it's not just that it's unpopular or that it failed. It is a massive failure at the box office for the brand. Even if you want to look at it on a budget standpoint, say they only spent $30 million, yes, Warner Brothers' new line, they're not going to lose a whole bunch of money on War of the Rohirrim, but it is a huge loss for the Lord of the Rings brand because I mean, I think this probably goes beyond worst case scenario than what they were thinking when they said, okay, yes, it's animated, yes, it's anime, yes, it's outside of what people are used to, and it doesn't feature Gandalf or Frodo or any of the characters that people know, but even still, yikes. Also, we talked about Denzel's worldwide grosses last week. These are the top 5 grossing films worldwide for Ridley Scott. Gladiator 2 has jumped into the top 5. His highest grossing film worldwide is The Martian at $653.6 million and Gladiator at $451.6 million. So that's a match domestically. But Prometheus is number 3 at $402.4 million. Gladiator 2 is at number 4. And I never would have guessed this at number 5. 2010's Robin Hood is Ridley Scott's 5th highest grossing film worldwide at $322.4 million. That was a different time cinematically. You had Russell Crowe, you had the brand name, but yeah, I think I probably would have guessed 2 or 3 movies before I would have guessed Robin Hood in that number 5 spot. Let's take a look at some of these specialty charts returning to the domestic box office. These are the per theater averages for this past weekend, and The Last Showgirl puts up one of the best per theater averages of the year, $50,300 in just one theater. Depending on what the final number is, that may displace Deadpool and Wolverine for the 5th best per theater average that we've seen so far this year. I'm going to wait till I get final numbers, but if that does come in at $50,300, then I will update that chart. If you don't know about The Last Showgirl, by the way, it stars Pamela Anderson as a showgirl in a show that's closing in Las Vegas after running for decades, and she's actually very, very good in it. There's a reason she's been getting awards buzz. Jamie Lee Curtis is in it. She's doing some crazy stuff. So I hope that they do give that movie at least a fair enough expansion, or a big enough expansion that big cities at least could go see it, because Pamela Anderson's very good in the movie. In second place is another Oscar contender, Nickel Boys, which opened in 2 theaters. It brought in just over $30,000 per theater. That is a best picture, best screenplay, cinematography, lots of different categories where that movie is considered to be a contender. In third place is Bad Shabbos, which was playing in 1 theater. It is, from what I read, kind of like a Jewish murder mystery. It debuted at the Tribeca Film Festival this past summer. In fourth is September 5. And I did look this up. It is September 5. It brought in $12,714 per theater in 7 theaters, also an awards contender. In 5th place was Interstellar, the 10th anniversary release. It brought in $10,327 per theater in 321 theaters. That was actually a jump in the theater count from last weekend, but it still comes in the top 5. Still not playing near me, but I'm glad that a lot of fans are getting a chance to see it the way that I think Christopher Nolan probably would have released it at the time, 10 years ago. Looking at the top films in limited release, which I define as 1,000 theaters or fewer, Interstellar is at number 1 at $3.3 million. Queer is in second place at $790,000. The Daft Punk animated film Interstellar 5555, playing in 641 theaters, brought in $737,000. Flow had a jump in theater count. It's now in 377 theaters. It brought in $374,000, looking much, much more certain that this would be or will be a Best Animated Feature contender at the Academy Awards. And then The Order, starring Jude Law and Nicholas Hoult, in 603 theaters, brings in $365,000. I saw this last week. I think it's a pretty good movie. Nicholas Hoult is having such an underappreciated year this year. He's great in Nosferatu. He's really good in that movie. He's really good in Juror Number 2, which Warner Brothers just buried. I think it's going to be on streaming soon. But he's put in 3 of my favorite performances of the year, and I don't think he's going to get anything for it awards-wise. He should. I mean, we're not quite at Toni Collette level here, but he's definitely being undervalued for the work that he's done. Looking at the fall holiday box office, so this is all releases post-Labor Day, Wicked remains the top grossing film so far this season at $359 million, followed by Moana 2 and Beetlejuice. Gladiator 2 moves up 2 spots to number 4, which bumps The Wild Robot down to number 5, and Venom: The Last Dance to number 6. And then kind of biding their time here, just waiting for the Lion King Sonic Juggernaut, are Red 1, Smile 2, and really I think the 2 movies that are on death row as far as this chart, Transformers 1 and Joker Folie à Deux. If I had come on this show last year this time and said that Joker Folie à Deux not only wouldn't be a top 10 movie for 2024, but wouldn't be a top 10 movie for the fall holiday season, I think most of you would have said I was crazy, and yet we are very close to that being the reality. No change this week in the 2024 annual domestic box office, but I just wanted to point out that Wicked will imminently pass Despicable Me 4 to become the third highest grossing movie of the year. It's about $2 million behind it right now, and Moana 2 is very close. So I think by next week's show, Despicable Me 4 will be down at number 5. Beetlejuice is in 6th. Dune Part 2, Twisters, Godzilla Kong the New Empire, and Kung Fu Panda 4 round out the top 10. And yeah, any movie that gets above $193.5 million at this point will be a top 10 grossing movie for the year. I think we have two definite contenders with Sonic and Mufasa. Not sure if Nosferatu or A Complete Unknown can get there, but hey, we'll see. Again, that's why you play the game. Some changes also in the 2024 worldwide box office. Moana 2 moves up to number 4 at $717 million. That moves Dune Part 2 down to 5th place. Godzilla Kong the New Empire and Kung Fu Panda 4 stay at number 6 and number 7. Wicked debuts on the chart at number 8 at $524.9 million. It's gunning for that number 6 spot. YOLO moves down 1 spot to number 9. It is now the last Chinese film left on this list. If either Mufasa or Sonic 3 can get above that $479.5 million global total, then it will be off the chart for this year. Venom: The Last Dance moves down 1 spot to number 10, but it's only about $4 million behind YOLO, so I think it could well jump over it if it's got just a little bit more gas left in the tank. Before we move on to the streaming charts, as we often do, I wanted to take a minute and look at a weekend in box office history. And this year, we're going back to the turn of the new millennium, whether you believe it's the year 2000 or the year 2001. We are at the turn of it at December 15th through the 17th, the 50th weekend of the year. And that saw What Women Want debuting at number 1 at $33.6 million. Adjusted for inflation, that would be $61.5 million. A Mel Gibson, Helen Hunt romantic comedy. I really can't think of anything else that says early 2000s more than that. Dude, Where's My Car?, which was certainly a classic in my generation, opened in 2nd place at $13.8 million. Adjusted for inflation, that would be $25.3 million. How the Grinch Stole Christmas in its 5th week of release stuck around in 3rd place. It dropped just 26% at $13.8 million. Actually about, $40,000 behind Dude, Where's My Car? It was basically a tie between those two films. The Emperor's New Groove opened at number 4. This is a movie that has been much more appreciated by later generations than it was certainly by my generation and the kids that were a few years behind me. $9.8 million in its opening weekend. Adjusted for inflation, that would be $17.9 million. And then in its 2nd week of release was Vertical Limit, which dropped 41.3% for a $9.1 million total. Adjusted for inflation, that would be $16.6 million. And as I said, Dude, Where's My Car? Is a movie that was certainly much quoted and much beloved by people that were my age back in 2000, the high school, college age crowd. I still hear some references to it, but I don't know if it's really translated completely to the younger generations. I'd be curious to know about that. But it did inspire my box office flashback trivia question this week. Dude, Where's My Car? Of course, one of the most iconic questions in movie history. And that got me wondering, adjusted for inflation, I'm going to make it a little bit harder. Adjusted for inflation, what is the highest grossing domestic film that ends with a question mark? And I will give you a hint right now. Who Framed Roger Rabbit technically does not end with a question mark. There's no question mark on the title of that movie. Some box office sites do list a question mark at the end, but there is no question mark. So the answer is not Who Framed Roger Rabbit. What movie is it, adjusted for inflation, that's the highest grossing domestically, ending with a question mark? I'll give you a minute to think about it. It's kind of an obscure movie. I'll be surprised. I'll be impressed if people say that they came up with it. And here we come with the answer. It's actually the Bill Murray comedy co-starring Richard Dreyfuss, What About Bob, back in 1991, which had an adjusted total of $163.1 million. There are fewer movies that end in question marks than you think. I had to go pretty deep to find this one. But yeah, that's the answer. What About Bob? The highest grossing film, adjusted for inflation, that ends in a question mark. This has been the most useless piece of trivia that I've probably ever shared on this show. All right, let's move on from the world of the box office to the world of streaming with some quick updates to our streaming chart. And we will start with the latest numbers from Netflix. This covers the week of December 2nd through the 8th. At number one and staying at number one is Our Little Secret, the Lindsay Lohan Christmas movie with another 23.47 million views. This has been a very big hit for Netflix so far. In second place, another Christmas film called That Christmas, which is animated, co-written by Richard Curtis from his books of the same name. Brian Cox voices Santa in this movie, 18.25 million views. And third is the Coleman Domingo series, The Madness, which comes in at 13.26 million views. Then we have The Grinch at number 4. This is the animated Illumination version, not the Jim Carrey version, at 12.91 million views. In fifth place is Mary, the story of Jesus' mother from director DJ Caruso. And really, he's the natural choice considering his filmography, which includes XXX Return of Xander Cage and I Am Number 4. Anthony Hopkins plays King Herod in the movie because apparently he will be in anything these days. 11.36 million views. In sixth place is Black Doves Season 1, which is a series from Britain starring Ben Whishaw and Keira Knightley. She plays a secret spy on the run. I think 60% of all Netflix original programming is now about a spy that somebody didn't know was a spy. 10.8 million views for Black Doves. And seventh is a non-Netflix original movie called 'Twas the Text Before Christmas. It was made last year about a woman whose life is changed by an accidental text message. I'm going to guess that there's a love story involved in this one. In eighth place is The Children's Train, an Italian film about kids seeking a better life during and immediately after World War II. And ninth place is Subservience, which is a film starring Megan Fox. I believe it came out last year or earlier this year. She plays a home robot assistant who turns deadly, and I wonder if they cast her because her name is actually Megan. They're like, we want to make our version of Megan. We should just cast somebody named Megan. Well, they did, and it's Megan Fox. And rounding out the top 10 is Lucky Bhaskar, an Indian film about a mild-mannered man who gets pulled into a life of crime. Let's move on now to the Nielsen streaming charts. Now, these are US viewing numbers only, and they're delayed by about a month because it takes Nielsen a while to crunch numbers from every different streaming service out there. This covers the week of November 11th through the 17th, and we'll start with the top streaming movies. And Deadpool and Wolverine was easily number one with 22.3 million hours watched in its debut week on Disney+. We'll have a lot more about those numbers in a couple minutes. In second place was the film Focus, which debuted on Netflix at 7.6 million hours watched. Then we had the debut of Hot Frosty on Netflix at 7.3 million hours watched. Twisters debuted on Peacock and comes in fourth place at 7.1 million hours watched. Then we had The Lost City, which is available on various different services, but I believe had a debut or a reemergence on Netflix. It comes in at 6 million hours watched. Moana is at number 6 at 5.1 million hours watched. I expect those numbers to go up because we're almost at the point where Moana 2 was released in theaters when it comes to the Nielsen numbers here. The Grinch makes the top 10 here as well, available on Peacock at this time at 4.9 million hours watched. Despicable Me 4, also on Peacock, comes in 8th place. Meet Me Next Christmas on Netflix comes in at 9th. And then Rob Peace, which I believe made its debut at Sundance in the early part of this year, made its debut on Netflix and comes in at number 10 with just over 4 million hours watched. And I mentioned Deadpool and Wolverine. It was actually the fourth best streaming movie debut as far as hours watched that we've seen on the Nielsen charts this year. It comes in behind Beverly Hills Cop Axel F, Inside Out 2, which debuted to 30.3 million hours, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which debuted on Netflix back in July, and then we have Deadpool and Wolverine at number 4. That bumps Roadhouse and The Union to a tie for 5th place at just over 22 million hours watched. And when we look at it as far as the biggest streaming movie weekends overall, debut or not, Deadpool and Wolverine comes in 5th place behind Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, then the second week of Damsel on Netflix, then the debuts of Inside Out 2 and Beverly Hills Cop Axel F. These are the most watched streaming shows according to Nielsen for November 11th through 17th. At number 1 is Cross, an Amazon original series that reboots the Alex Cross franchise with Aldous Hodge taking on the role that was previously played by Tyler Perry and Morgan Freeman. 22.7 million hours watched for Cross. Outer Banks comes in second on Netflix, followed by Family Guy and Bob's Burgers, which are just dominant Hulu shows on the Nielsen charts. Grey's Anatomy comes in 5th, Bluey comes in 6th, Lost comes in 7th, The Lincoln Lawyer comes in 8th, Cobra Kai debuted some new episodes in November, so it comes back to the charts at number 9 with 12.9 million hours watched, and then SpongeBob SquarePants rounds out the top 10. Looking at the top shows as far as watch time per available episode, so you take all the 20 top streaming shows and divide their runtime by how many episodes you could actually watch, Cross comes in at number 1 at 2.84 million hours watched per episode. And then we have The Penguin. This is the first time The Penguin has actually showed up on the Nielsen Top 20. And I've talked about this in previous weeks. It's because it's considered a library, quote unquote, show because it airs on HBO. So it's thrown in with Grey's Anatomy and all of the older shows. It's not a streaming original by Nielsen's definition, so it was kind of getting drowned out by shows that had seasons and seasons worth of watch time to compete with. But it made the chart on its last week. I think this is the week that it had its season or series finale, and we had 1.24 million hours watched per episode. That's roughly equivalent to what we were seeing for Agatha All Along. So I think we may have seen similar viewership for those two shows. It was just easier for Agatha to make the Nielsen Top 20. The Diplomat comes in third place, followed by Special Ops Lioness and Arcane, hitting number 5 at 528,000 hours watched per episode. Outer Banks is in 6th, The Lincoln Lawyers in 7th, Tulsa King is in 8th, the Netflix series Sisters Feud is at number 9, and Yellowstone, which began airing new episodes, is at number 10 at 219,000 hours watched per episode. A quick change to the most watched original streaming series of the year, according to Nielsen. The Lincoln Lawyer moves up to number 8 at 117.5 million hours watched. That bumps Love Island down to number 9 and Avatar: The Last Airbender down to number 10. Bridgerton and Love is Blind, easily the two most watched original streaming shows through November 17th. And then we actually have a change as far as the most watched library streaming series since Nielsen began reporting numbers back in 2020. Bluey has actually overtaken CoComelon to become the third most watched library streaming series of the past few years at 1.843 billion hours, just edging out CoComelon and 1.839 billion hours. Back in the days when I was going nuts because CoComelon kept popping up every single week on the Netflix charts and the Nielsen charts, I never could have imagined that another kids show could come along and have more viewership than CoComelon, but things changed at the drop of the hat in the entertainment industry, and Bluey is now the champion of kids programming on the Nielsen charts. And that does it for Charts with Dan. This week, there are, of course, a few high-profile films that are hitting theaters this upcoming weekend. And this is not one of those pre-Christmas weekends where we're looking for a depressed box office turnout. Sometimes when the Friday before Christmas is on the 22nd or the 23rd, then we have a lower weekend number because people are traveling and doing stuff for Christmas. And then things kind of explode going into that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of Christmas week. But the 20th is actually a pretty good launch date, so I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of pre-Christmas depression at the box office. First of all, though, on Thursday on Netflix, Virgin River Season 6 will be debuting. So before you head to the movies, if that's one of your favorite streaming shows, you can look for it on Thursday. Then on Friday, Mufasa the Lion King opens in theaters. I will have my review of that movie tomorrow morning. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 opens in theaters also on Friday. I'll have my review of that movie on Wednesday morning. Hitting limited release is The Brutalist, which is considered to be a frontrunner in a few different categories at the Oscars. I've seen the movie. I think I'm going to get a review out for it this week because it's one of those awards movies that's kind of an X factor. It's not quite as known for a lot of people, a bit of an air of mystery around it. Also opening this weekend in limited release is The Room Next Door from Pedro Almodovar. This was the movie that won him finally the top prize at an international film festival. It's an English language film, which is a new thing for him, starring Tilda Swinton and Julianne Moore. Also debuting this Friday on Netflix is The 6888, which was written and directed by Tyler Perry. It's an historical drama based on the only female Black Army Corps serving overseas in World War II. Kerry Washington and Oprah Winfrey are among the cast, and the movie was actually chosen as the vessel for Diane Warren's attempt to win an Academy Award for Best Original Song. So that's a pretty big honor for you to be chosen as Diane Warren's vessel, and we'll see if that finally wins her that elusive Academy Award. And then coming up on Sunday is the debut of What If Season 3 on Disney Plus. They'll be debuting one episode per day starting on Sunday through December 29th. That's such an interesting show. At one point, that was my most anticipated MCU show on Disney Plus, and then I didn't even finish season 2. So maybe season 3 will be better. I don't know. I've been very disappointed by What If because it had such limitless potential and just, I don't know. I don't think it's lived up to it. And that's all I've got for you this week. Be sure to stay tuned right here on the channel. As I mentioned, I've got more reviews coming out. I will have charts leading into the Christmas holiday next week. And then, of course, in a couple of weeks, we'll talk about the box office results. What movie opened number 1? What movie opened number 2? Was it a blockbuster season at the box office as we try to claw back some of the ground that we lost earlier this year? You can find out all the answers right here. Thank you for watching the show. Thanks to all of our sponsors. You can check them out in the description below. But most of all, thanks for spending time right here with me. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.